angst, defiance, solidarity. We heard it all, we saw it all. We have seen so many flavors through the day, and sometimes we've been shifting our energies just between one session to the other. We started the morning on a very musical note. Those of you who have followed the journey from the morning, we had a magical session by 19 very, very cute children. We are also ending the evening today on a classical note. We know Vikram Sampath as an author historian with a deep passion and knowledge for music. He is also the ARSC awardee for excellence in historical research in music and the founder of India's first online digital sound archive for vintage gramophone recordings called Archive of Indian Music. In dialogue with him on his lesser-known book, The Indian Classical Music and the Gramophone, is Madhu Natraj from the Natya STEM Academy.
And it's an intimate gathering, so I promise Vikram won't bite. So please do move in closer to us so we can have a nice interaction. And also, may I request one of the volunteers to please close that door? I think a party is already begun outside. May I request the sound department to please play the first track that we had asked for? And please listen carefully. We'd like you to identify this person whose voice you will be hearing. Sound person? Okay, great. Any guesses? You get an extra coffee tomorrow, I hear. Come on.
Not Akhila, not Akhila, not Akhila.
No. Yes, MS Subbalakshmi, and an extra coffee, you know, right? For if you can guess which year this was. It's 1927 when she was all of 10, right?
10 years old.
Yeah.
26.
Vikram, I wanted to ask you, you know, I mean, your immersion in history, music, literature has meant also that 80% of your life has been spent in the dusty archives, rummaging through files, and, you know, lonely time spent in libraries, chore bazaars, all of that. I just wanted to ask you, you know, each of your projects, you know, when you curate events and the archives you've created, the books you've written, it's all about creating perpetuity. And when did this, you know, take seed in you, wanting to do this?
Wow, that's like a very heavy question right at the start. A very good evening, everyone, and it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with a dear, dear friend. We meet only at festivals, and that's such a sad thing that, you know, despite living in the same city. That question, Madhu, I think it goes back to several decades now, and it was never with the intention of leaving behind perpetuity or any kind of legacy there. It was just a very childish interest in both history as well as in classical music. And so, in my first book, I started writing on the history of Mysore and the Vodiyars of Mysore when I was all of 12 or 13. And that was never with the intention that it would become a book someday. It was with the way the Mysore royal family was portrayed in a serial, popular television serial those days, Sword of Tipu Sultan. I don't know how many would remember. And that was what led me to this path of discovery, a self-motivated and more importantly self-funded drive to explore the truth. And that led to several other projects, including the biography of India's first ever artist, musician and vocalist to record her voice on the gramophone, this amazing woman called Gauhar Jan of Calcutta. And that led to several other things, which led to the establishment of the archive, whose piece you heard, the first ever recording of Bharat Ratna M.S. Subbulakshmi as a 10-year-old child in 1926. So the archive has so many such gems, which I was also so surprised and amazed to discover in the course of my journey.
Thank you, Vikram. And we all know that these artists, poets, writers, all are repositories of time in a sense, repositories of history. But like you say in your acknowledgement in Gauhar Jan, I remember a particular line where you say, the artists of those times were so sort of self-effacing and the art was bigger than them, which also means there's very little information about them. Yeah. And very little information, especially about their personal lives. Right. And which means that you had to dig deeper. And before I ask Vikram to speak about his books, the archives, and also the new project that he has done with Ricky Cage, that's the Women of the Records. I'd like to tell you all, I don't know how many of us here know that Vikram has studied Carnatic music, assessing the poetry of the time or the literature of the time, from Sanskrit to Persian to German. The list is endless. So Vikram, how did you go about, really, as my mother would say, khuraj ke, finding these, first of all, you chose to, at that point, lesser spoken of, shall we say. I mean, Balachandar with his eccentricities and Gauhar Jan also with hers. What made you choose these two?
Well, Gauhar Jan was serendipity because, I was sitting in one of those musty archives in the palace in Mysore, and there was this box file full of letters of all the visiting musicians and artists who came to the Mysore court. The Mysore court, as you know, was a melange of all the, the best of artists from all, walks of life, from different streams, not just Carnatic music, but Hindustani music, Western classical, and all of that. And in that, there was one little file which spoke about this lady who was the first gramophone celebrity of India, a very lesser known person, Gauhar Jan. And then she had died in Mysore in 1930. She had stayed there all of 2 years. A big hand to our dear friend and Grammy Award winner, Ricky Cage, who's just walked in style. So, so Gauhar Jan was, peeping at me from those files, waiting, a story that was waiting to be told. And in those letters, there were entreaties to the Maharaja's government saying, don't cut my tax, give me more salary and all of that. And in typical bureaucratic fashion, there was like rejected written across all those files. And somehow I think the ring of Umrao Jan and the whole fascination with that era led me to this trail, really not knowing how to do this, because here was a Tawayef who died way back in 1930, and being a Tawayef, no legal heirs, no students, no known family, nothing of that. And I just accidentally come across her in the place of her death. And then it was like literally looking for a needle in a haystack, chasing her across the length and breadth of India, from Azamgarh, where she was born, to Banaras, Darbhanga, Rampur, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, even Berlin and London, and different parts of India for the next 4 or 5 years. It was a mad obsession. And it was like literally putting together pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to recreate the story of her life, which was so fascinating, as I discovered, and which in a way also changed the course of my life thereafter, which led to the establishment of the archive and so on. About Dr. S. Balachandar, again, a very much forgotten maestro, a hugely talented, immensely talented musician who taught himself the veena. He didn't have a guru, he taught himself the veena. He was a chess player at a young age of 9 or 10. He was already an international chess champion, again taught himself chess. He was also a Tamil cinema director. Some of the greatest films, Andanal and all those, Hitchcock kind of dramas, at a time when Tamil cinema was doing all of mythology and Savitri and Sita and all of that. Here was a man who again taught himself the craft of making films. And for all his achievements, he had become literally a pariah in the Carnatic music world because he had dared to stand up against what he called as, the malpractices in the music world. The arts world looks wonderful from the outside, but then I'm sure those who are artists also know that there's a lot of other things that goes behind the stage. And here was a man who dared to stand up against that and be counted. And for that reason, he was cancelled. And I was fortunate to study under his student, Jayanti Akka, Dr. Jayanti Kumaresh, and she used to read out some of his speeches and his articles which spoke about how one needs to have integrity and honesty in the field of classical music. And that was one reason why nobody in the Chennai firmament probably talks about him. And so that's why, somewhere I think, Madhu, that characters who are either maligned or forgotten or completely misrepresented, they come looking for redemption to my pen. And it's not that I choose them. I'm just so fortunate and blessed that they choose me as an instrument to write their story.
That's so beautifully put, and modest as he is. I just remember a little anecdote. I remember Vikram and I became friends when he released his book on Balachandraji. And as we were leaving and we bought that copy, Ma and I saw Gohar. So we picked it up, and then both of us started pulling the book. She's saying, I want it first, and I want it first. In any case, she said, I want to meet this boy after reading the book. So Vikram came home for dinner, and we were talking, and she said, Dekhiye, I'm a Kathak dancer, so I'm interested in the Bais and, Malka Jan and all of them. But तुमको कहाँ से interest आया in Bais में? So he says, maybe I'm just a happy bystander. I just thought we had to share one Vikramism here. So Vikram, I think before we talk about this wonderful archive of voices and music that you have, and you made it accessible to everybody, right? And also you gave one recently to the University of Mumbai and many others. Maybe could you play the voice of
Gohar Jan, since we
Gohar
spoke
Jan,
so much
yeah.
about her. Yeah. The sound,
please.
If you could play the other track. Are they there?
Behind the
My name is Gohar Jan. ये खास बाबू दिल्ली चंद की बनाई हुई ठुमरी है. इसको मैंने गाया है.
I think, yeah, one round of applause for that wonderful artistry and the artist. Vikram, it would be great if you could tell us about this particular recording also.
I think this is older than the MS clip. This was perhaps recorded in 1905 or 06. So she recorded first in 1902, and that's when recording technology came to India from London. And interestingly, when recording came to India, most of the men folk, for all the men in the room, The men folk stayed away from it. And they had lots of apprehensions, lots of doubts, lots of superstitions and inhibitions that, recording into that evil English instrument, you lose your voice or the gods will be displeased and so on. And kudos to all the women across the country, north, south, east, west, who took the gauntlet of recording. And if they had not done that in the early decades of the 20th century, the Indian music industry would not be where it is today. And circumventing huge number of challenges, societal challenges, all these taboos and inhibitions. There were logistic challenges because that was the era of acoustic recording, mechanical recording, when there were no microphones like this to amplify your voice. So the artist would have to, there would be a horn on the wall, and the artist would have to crane his or her head into that and scream out as loudly as he or she could. And depending on how loudly they screamed, there would be a stylus on the other end which would vibrate and cut etches on the master shellac. And Indian classical musicians, while singing, they tend to move their heads and hands and all of that as the raga overpowers you. And that would spoil the acoustic energy going into that horn. So there would be two agents who would hold your hands, one who would hold your head and push you into that terrible horn and ask you to bellow hard. So you can imagine what a terrible nightmare this would have been for those women who went into these makeshift studios and recorded. And all these, that's why some of those are high pitch, including the MS thing that you heard was high pitch songs. But when we understand the historical context, we are able to appreciate the music much more. And all these recordings were only of 3 minutes duration, right? And something as expansive as Indian classical music, where you can expound on a raga for hours and hours and all through the night and all that. Here, like Pressy writing in literature, you had to compress that into this 3-minute capsule, which again, what do you leave, what aspect, if you, little bit that you heard of Gohar's clip, she does a little bit of the sthai, then the antara, then a little bit of tans, then some sargams here and there. And at the end, they also had to announce their names. My name is Gohar Jan, she would like flamboyantly announcing, because there was a reason. Though the recordings were made in India, the initial production of the copies were done in Hanover in Germany. So the master recording would be done in India and shipped all the way back to Germany. And there for the technician, this was an anonymous voice. So they would listen to the whole recording, identify the artist with this announcement, and multiple copies would be then stamped and sent back to India for sales. So you can imagine how difficult it must have been. And when society was against it, the men, the ustads and the panditjis and all of them were like, you should not do this. At such a time for these women to actually go forward and do this, I think that was a huge leap for them. And I think to commemorate that, I'm so happy and fortunate to have collaborated with a very dear friend, the gifted musician who's sitting here, Ricky Cage. We've brought out this album and book called Women of the Records, which actually talks of the life, whatever little is known of these women, because most of them belong to the courtesan community, the Tawayafs and the Devdasis. And the whole morality debate that happened in India in the 1920s and 30s, the Devdasi Abolition Act, so much so that all
anti-Nach movement also.
Anti-Nach campaigns across the country ensured that women who came from these traditional performing houses, they were all branded as common prostitutes and completely thrown out of the space of performance. And their stories, their life histories, their music, all of that, literally their poetries, most of them, we are in a poetry festival, most of these women were also consummate poets. Gohar Jan herself wrote a lot of poetry. You had Bangalore Nagaratnamma, who had this wonderful book called Radhika Santwanamu, a very erotic love poetry of the 17th century, which she got translated. Gohar's mother, Badi Malka Jan, who wrote this fascinating collection of Urdu ghazals called a divan called Magzane Ulfate Mallika, or the treasure trove of Malka's love. Incidentally, when I heard about this, I tried to get a copy of it across India. Nowhere available. The only copy in the British Library in London, which is where it is sitting. And thank God it's there. Here we would have sold it off, to sell peanuts or whatever else. Yeah. So most of them wrote prolifically. They were the first tax-paying women of the country. Most of the Devdasis and the Tawaiffs, but they were demonized so much that their stories have been completely erased from the national, musical and historical consciousness of India. So to exhume them literally from the grave, it's been a great, Herculean task for Ricky and me to put this thing together. And hopefully that's something, again, which will bring back some of these names and voices into circulation. Otherwise, even those who are musicians, now everyone knows Gauhar Jan. 10 years ago, nobody knew much about her when I started my research. But others, Janki Bai of Allahabad, Zohra Bai Agrewali, Malka Jan of Agra, Bedana Dasi of Calcutta. Then you had Salem Godavari, Coimbatore Thai, Bangalore Nagaratnamma from our own city, Dhanakoti Ammal of Kanchipuram, Achan Bai of Bombay, Bai Sundra Bai of Pune. I mean, there were close to 600 women in that early era who recorded. We just have faint memories of who these people were. And as I said, if they had not done what they had, circumventing so many challenges, the Indian music industry, what it is today, it would never have been.
Absolutely, Vikram. And also, we were just talking about it earlier, about how artists then, if you're a musician, you also had to be interested in poetry or trained in dance and other forms, because you were a complete artist, and I think Gauhar also went to Bindadin Maharaj to learn Bhav and Kathak, and and when you till recently watched Girja Devi or Shobha Gurtu, they would be singing with all the nakra and the Bhav and all of that. Yeah. And also in Gauhar, I remember, because I think, Vikram, what makes your writing so special is that, you also are looking at the dard that these people had, which was such an important aspect in Hindustani music and dance, about mining from the debris of loss and abandonment and all of that, especially that the Tawaif community went through. And also, I remember when I first read Gauhar, what struck me was that, like a prologue, for every chapter, you have used a couplet, a poem, a verse from all of them, and especially Farsi, Avdhi, all of that, and that sets the pace for, and I think that's what makes all of that resonates in your writing, and so you, of course, are completely credited all these wonderful people, and I agree, but, somewhere does that resonate? This whole concept of, you've said this earlier, you kind of resurrecting them, but that their pain also is not known to people, I mean.
Yeah, I think in the book, there was suddenly, as Madhu mentioned, every chapter very beautifully, those verses just landed themselves, I think, somewhere. Malka Jan's and several others. There was a very beautiful couplet which came to mind during one of the chapters. I think it was Sahir Ludhianvi who'd written that जो साज से निकली है वो धुन सब ने सुनी है, जो साज से निकली है वो धुन सब ने सुनी है, पर जो तार पे गुजरी है वो किसको पता है, that the lovely music that's coming from the instrument, we all hear, we say, wow, it's so beautiful, but what happens to the string on which it is played? It goes through so much of stress and strain. So I think an artist's life, an artist's art also, I think it gets exemplified with pain, with the sense of loss, and we have entire genres in our classical music, and poetry associated with those genres, whether it's Thumri or Dadra, and Padams and Javalis and all of that in both styles of music, which specifically deal with this sense of longing. The Ashtanayikas, the Viraha Bhav is one where longing, and one could look at it in a physical form of a lover and loved, but also in a metaphysical form of the soul yearning for the super soul and whatever else. But then unless there's this yearning, unless there's this dissatisfaction with what you're doing, I don't think true art can germinate and bloom, because satisfaction, after all, is death.
True, and like pain as a germination board in a sense, right? Yeah. But I remember also my guru also saying the same, she said, unless you know separation, how will you know the joy of union? Sanjog and Viyog, which is a concept in dance and music. And also I was, reminded also about, I think about 12 years ago, was it little lesser than that? After your book on Balachandar is when you started working on the archive of classical music and also voices from about 120 years from now.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about that? Because I think you've done so much, such prolific work that one forgets what was earlier.
Yeah. So this is the Archive of Indian Music, which was established in 2011, and it was a takeaway from the Gohar project, where I wanted to listen to her voice, being also a student of music. But those 78 RPM shellac discs are nowhere available, and the machines to play them are also hardly there. Those needles which go around, that is not to be found. And so most of these, I was shocked to see that most of those 78 RPM records are found in chor bazaars, in raddi shops across India. And that's where the valuable cultural inheritance of this nation lies, unattended, uncared for. And around the same time, when I'd gone to on a fellowship to Berlin, I actually surveyed the archives across Europe, and all of them, Berlin, Vienna, London, Paris, they have the concept of a national sound archive, where all the recordings of their country are kept in one place, preserved, beautifully catalogued, maintained, digitized, easy to access. And what struck me more was there were lots of recordings from India, which were also there, not just of music, but also voices of common Indians. For instance, there was this one archive in Berlin called the Laut Archive, which had about 150 voices of Indian prisoners of war of the First World War, who were there lodged in German war camps and all of that. And they were just, this bhopu was put in front of them and they said, kuch bolo, in their native language. So from Bengali, Pushto, Sindhi, Tamil, Punjabi, they just spoke something, kissa, chutkula, kahani. And Germans being Germans, for every 3-minute recording, there would be 40 pages of documentation saying who the fellow is, which village he came from, what was his father's name, did he go to school, then the transliteration of all of that into German, translation, from that language to this. So all of this, and these people used to ask me, doesn't India have a national sound archive? And as a student of history, as a student of music, and more so as an Indian, I would really hang my head in shame that we don't have such a place, and all our records are lying strewn in chor bazaars and kabadi dukans. And so that's when, I approached Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai from our own city, and he said, you start this off as a private trust, and I'll give you the seed capital to begin this whole thing. And that's how in 2011 we started it. And today we've rescued about 15,000 records from across India.
That deserves a,
Thank you.
what a treasure trove.
Yeah.
I'm told we have hardly 5 minutes left,
Yeah.
Vikram, and you had one
And,
very special voice that...
These range from classical, Carnatic and Hindustani music to folk recordings,
Yeah.
Also theatre recordings like Marathi Natya Sangeet and all of that, and the Mysore Palace orchestra, the theatre group in the Mysore Palace, Chamarajendra Nataka Mandali or something, that used to record. Then early cinema of the Sehgal and the Devika Rani era, and also certain voices and speeches of important people. And I thought we'll end with one such recording, the last recording I request you to play, and it'll be obvious as to who that is because he announces it.
Speaking to Indians in East Asia,
Can you start from the beginning?
my countrymen in East Asia.
Excuse me, can you start from the beginning?
No prizes for
This
guessing
is
this
Subhash Chandra Bose speaking to Indians in East Asia. My countrymen in East Asia, while I am in Tokyo, I desire to address a few words to you, and I have no doubt that you will give them due consideration. In the first place, I desire to thank you most heartily for the warm and enthusiastic welcome that you have given me on the occasion of my public appearance in East Asia, and for the assurance that you have given me of your wholehearted support to our efforts to liberate our dear motherland.
Wow, what a booming voice. That was Subhash
I
Chandra
know,
Bose, those who
yeah.
missed it. So there are lots of such leaders, including, I must tell you, the only gramophone record of Mahatma Gandhi. He recorded a lot for the radio, but on the gramophone he recorded very less. Only in 1931, when he went to the Round Table Conference around that time, there's somebody there who said, say something, Mr. Gandhi, and he said, I don't want to talk about politics, and I will talk about my conception of God. And so he starts talking about what he thinks God is, and etc., etc. And so this is that's the only gramophone record of Gandhiji, and it's called The Spiritual Message of Gandhi. And that's also there in the archive, but imagine where I found this. This was found in one of those Raddi shops in Chandni Chowk in Delhi, amidst a heap of lots of others, and the owner was actually sitting with his legs on it and so on. So that's unfortunately how we treat our history, our past, our heritage, totally callous about it. We would rather let things fall apart and not take care. But hopefully a very small, very, very humble attempt to ensure that these are brought back into circulation. And all of this is actually free of cost for all of you to access. So on soundcloud.com, if you actually go and type Archive of Indian Music, put up almost about 2,000 tracks which are already there from all these genres, including Gandhiji's voice, Subhash Chandra Bose, Tagore reciting his poetry, Prashno, and several others, Lala Hardayal, and so many others who are all there on the archive, along with the music clips. Sorry? No. That was not on the gramophone. That was, I think, the radio. So it's there for all of you to access freely from the confines of your home, because I truly believe this is the cultural inheritance of every Indian man and woman and child, and so nobody needs to have a jurisdiction over it saying, I own this or whatever. It's not my property. I'm just being an instrument to bring these voices of the past to the people of today, and more importantly, for posterity and future generations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vikram. And the thing is, this is the last, session for the day. I mean, I know the festival continues tomorrow, so we were hoping we could go on for some time, because half an hour is not enough to talk about all the work that Vikram's done, and also the impact it is having and will continue to have. So, but we have to bring this to a close. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No,
he didn't sing.
No.
There's no time. Saved by the clock. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what a fantastic way to end our day, with so much food for thought about art, continuity, our sense of legacy. Where does the old stop and where does the new begin? It's a big question. And where does the poetry stop and the appreciation begin? Is the poetry over when the poem finishes, or is the actual poetry the aftertaste of what remains? As we end this day today, and we have had a lot to savor and a lot to look forward to for tomorrow. Good night, folks. It's been a lovely day.